I always remember when my kids were at school, the head teacher said to me, the people that turn up in the flashiest cars are the ones that don't pay the school fees on time.
Diane Watson is a female founder who's established herself as a powerhouse in the world of finance and wealth planning. And when she discovered her strategy for success, there was no stopping her.
I started to, work with people who were really successful, and I built a reputation within certain firms.
A passionate advocate for women in business, Diane knows firsthand the challenges and pitfalls of being a successful female entrepreneur.
You are putting yourself in a vulnerable position if you go from being an employed person to setting yourself up in business.
I'm Nicola Sands, and in this episode of Success Means Business, Diane shares her inspiring journey, as well as some important insights for people of every age wanting to secure their financial future. Hi all, just before we start, I've got a very quick favour to ask. If you do enjoy this episode and the content on this channel, please could you hit the subscribe button? It really helps us to grow, to keep the conversations going, and we want to make this podcast better and better as we go along. Let's dive in. Diane, welcome to the podcast.
Well, it's lovely to be here. It's fantastic to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for coming in. Now, your interest in finance has served you very well, and as a result, lots of other people as well. But where did you get this interest in finance? Where did it come from? Because your family weren't in that business, were they?
No. So my mother, I think, sparked my interest because she was the eldest of 9 children, born in a very poor family in Liverpool. And I think her fear of being poor made her very prudent. I mean, my parents saved half the deposit for their first house. She was very much, I don't want my family to be like my situation growing up. And she was always talking to me about money, about saving, saying things like, make sure that you rely on yourself and not a man. My father was a joiner, so he was often without work. And so she took herself back off to college and university and became a teacher and a head teacher. And I think that messaging as a child made me very interested in making sure that I was financially okay.
She sounds like a very resourceful woman.
She was a very resourceful woman because if you think about it, you're talking about in the sort of early 60s. Most of my friends' mothers would have been at home. And she drove, from Warrington to Liverpool every day, to do a teacher training. So she was a bit of a trailblazer, really. And she had the option to be an air traffic controller, but her family wouldn't let her go off and needed her at home. They needed her money. So she had a tough time, really.
And in those days, women didn't really do a lot when it came to finance. I mean, they weren't even allowed on a mortgage. And,
exactly.
It was almost like, the man earns the money, the woman stays at home. So do you think she was unique in that respect?
I think she was certainly one of a kind. I mean, you weren't even allowed to have a bank account in your own name until about 1974. So she definitely drove the finances in our house. And what was interesting when my father passed away and my mother went into a care home is all the financial paperwork was hers. Everything was written in her name. So she obviously had a handle on the finances. And I think my dad was happy that she did that.
But your first career, though, Diane, wasn't actually in finance, was it?
No.
So where did you start with your career path?
So I never knew what I wanted to do when I graduated from university. And I found myself working for British Nuclear Fuels in Cheshire. And I was in the press office. So I was writing copy. I was going out on site and writing stories about new equipment. I mean, back in those days, we had a Girl of the Month on the front of our newspaper. So I did that for 4 years. So nothing to do with finance. And
journalism.
Journalism.
Mm-hmm.
I used to write for the Cheshire Life and Lancashire Life. I used to write sort of feature stories. And then I got a job with Austin Rover in the Midlands. And I was thrown into this very different world, which was training. And I was responsible for selling the concept of computer-based training, which Austin Rover had been funded to produce, to all the large corporates in the UK. And it was a really exciting time because it was very new. And we were doing talks, and I think my first day at work, I had to do a talk.
So you're very much in the corporate world. Was it quite male dominated?
Very male dominated.
Yeah. How did you find that?
I mean, it was interesting at times. I mean, I then went to the Provident Financial Group in Yorkshire, and there were 4 women at my grade in that organisation.
And how big was it?
It was a big, very big company, and we used to go for coffee every morning with the board. We used to have our own private dining rooms. So being a girl in both Austin Rover and Provident Financial Group definitely made you sort of stand out. You had to be resilient, really, definitely.
So at what point did you decide I'm going to start my own company in the financial world?
Okay, so I had my children. We did a lot of work from a training perspective with financial services companies, so I had a good background knowledge. My ex-husband also was in financial services, and somebody where he worked said to me, rather than just work for him, why don't you do it yourself? Why don't you set up your own business? And both my kids were at school, and so I did all my qualifications. I've obviously always been interested in finance, and I set my business up in 1994.
Was that a massive step for you? I mean, had it actually entered your head before to set up your own business?
Not really. No, not really. But I knew that I wanted the flexibility. I'd had enough of the corporate world. I'd experienced in my last job sort of stuff that I didn't really like around the fact that you're a woman. You know, you'll never be stuff that I didn't really gel with me.
Sort of culture, attitudes.
Yes, culturally. Yeah. I felt I was very good at my job. I was very good at my job. But I thought, if I run my own business, then I can influence what happens. I can call my own shots, and I won't be responsible for any of that corporate stuff that I'd had to deal with.
And how hard was it to actually set up your own business? How did you go about it? Where did you start?
I mean, it was very hard because back in those days, there were hardly any female entrepreneurs. Most of the people that I met were employed. They were working in the professional services, as we call it. But I had a very clear vision for the business, and that was that I was a graduate, I was a female. I felt that was quite unique in those days, and that I would therefore be attracted to other women. And I used to go to events in Leeds, meet lots of lawyers, accountants, and I felt that I'd got something in common with them. I wasn't a male. I was educationally on their level, and that I would be able to, understand and empathise and work with those women, and that's what I did.
So what were the business problems that your business was solving?
Women who really hadn't really taken any time out to think about themselves. A lot of them were newly qualified, so they were needing to think about, back in those days, starting pensions. There were lots of firms in Leeds that didn't have their own pensions. They were getting on the housing ladder, so they needed mortgages. So they really needed somebody to hold their hand and to help them sort of make all the financial decisions that they needed to make to have the best start.
Okay, and what did you call your first company?
So my first company was just called Diane Watson Financial Planning.
Were you confident that you had a market there that would use your services?
I was confident, but I realised it would be quite hard in the first instance to go from a standing start. I didn't know anybody in Yorkshire because I'd only moved to Yorkshire latterly, and I'd then had the children, so I hadn't got any natural network. So I knew that I was starting from scratch, and I knew it would take time to build. But I think I had a clear vision for the business. I've always been a long-term thinker. I knew that it would take time, but I felt that if I went about it in the right way, then it would be successful. And I had to take a few risks really to start with, because I found an office, I employed somebody, which my ex-husband said was a stupid thing to do. But I felt if I was going to run a proper business, it needed to operate as a proper business. And I recognised that I'm not very good at the back office stuff. So I thought if I could have someone doing that, and I could be out there, finding clients and working with people, that would be a good strategy. Although it did put me under a lot of pressure financially to start with.
And you talk about not having a network at all in Yorkshire. How did you go about correcting that? Do you think, was it a case of going out and about and joining networking clubs and so on?
I mean, there was only one networking group in Leeds when I started working. But I think what happened is because all of my clients worked with other people, so they worked with other lawyers, other accountants, other chartered surveyors. I started working with ASDA. Everybody that I worked with other people who also needed advice. And that was really how I grew the business. It was by referrals. It was somebody saying, oh, Susan in whatever department needs somebody. I did used to do talks for women. And I suppose I got a bit of a reputation, although I had equal numbers of male and female clients, I have to say, as I have throughout my whole career.
And tell us about the first couple of years then. Was it a real challenge, and what was it like balancing your family life with working so hard?
I mean, it was harder than I thought. I worked evenings, so I used to go home, bath the children, and then go back out and see people in the evenings. I'd often be working at weekends because, I mean, there was no internet like there is now. We used to have to order all our illustrations on and get them posted and go through them all. So it was a really laborious job. There wasn't the same sort of behind the scenes support that there is now. So in some ways, I used to think, I remember going out for dinner with some friends, clients that were lawyers, and thinking, do you know what, maybe I'd be better just being an employee like they are.
I was just about to ask you that, actually. Were there ever any moments when you thought, what am I doing? Is this going to be worth it? Was it difficult to keep the faith at times?
I think it was difficult because I think you're not only giving up a secure income, but when you go, I remember when we went on holiday in the early days thinking, not only am I on holiday, but I'm not earning any money either, because I'm running my own business. So if I'm not seeing clients, I'm not earning any money. So would I have been better going back into an employed position? But based on the experience I'd had, I knew that ultimately that wasn't the right thing to do. And I had to kind of, roll my sleeves up and just get on with it for the longer term.
It's like that saying, when the going gets tough,
The
keep
tough get
going. Or
Yeah.
keep going.
Yeah, exactly.
When did you feel you reached a real breakthrough with the business then, Diane, when you thought, yeah, things are really motoring now?
So in 1999, I'd established the business. It was doing really, really well. And I was approached to join St James's Place, which is obviously a very large, the largest wealth manager in the UK. It was a very small business then. It was 600 people. And I took a massive step back financially to join them. But I felt that, again, longer term, it was a good place to be. It was supportive. There were lots of things that they offered that I was doing all by myself, and so that was a huge step forward. And for 2 or 3 years, it was exceptionally hard because in 1999, when I joined, the stock market hit its peak and then it started to fall away. And we had 3 or 4 years where people were very despondent. The market hit an all-time low. People's investments went down. Financially, it was a step back for me. So it was tough. It was tough.
So it wasn't just a linear journey to success.
No, it was really hard. It was really hard.
At what point did it turn a corner after that? Because, you did go on to sell a business. Tell us about how you went about selling your business.
So after 2004, things got better. A lot of my clients who were clients before I joined St James's Place really liked what I was doing. I think I've always built very long-term trusted relationships. I had a great manager so even though I was running my own business, we have support behind the scenes. And he really started to get me motivated and thinking about how I could really grow the business and what my unique selling point was. And I just kept true to what I believed I was really good at, which was hard because I was married to someone who had the same business but had a very different way of operating. But I felt that what I was doing was right. And the business really started to kick on after that. In 2007, had this amazing manager. And he had so much enthusiasm that he persuaded me that I could be the first woman ever to be on the stage for St James's Place. And he just swept me along with his enthusiasm. And at the end of that year, that's exactly what happened. And
A lot of the people I've spoken to about how they've become successful, there's generally a couple of people supporting them that have really pushed them to that level, that really believed in them, almost sometimes more than they believed in themselves. So do you think that was that person for
So
you?
Mark was definitely that person. He was definitely that person. He was the person who persuaded me to join. He said it will be tough, but long term it will be better for you. And he was the person who believed in me so much that year. Actually, it was 2006, and then I was on the stage in 2007. And he just made me feel that anything was possible. And then the business really grew, and I started to have more staff. I started to, work with people who, were really successful. And I built a reputation within certain firms of where people work together that I was great at doing my job. And I just focused on those people.
You said you were surrounded by people who were really successful and doing really well. Do you think that in itself helped to propel you forward?
Yes, absolutely. So I think when you're in business, you have to be very clear about the kinds of people that you want to work with. There's no point spending a lot of time with people who, really are not the right people for you. And I think that's often where people make mistakes. They're not valued enough. They spend a lot of time working with people who really aren't the right people for them. And that in itself is hard because you're looking in a smaller pond, aren't you, for the sorts of people. I decided along the way that I didn't want to work evenings anymore. I wanted to spend time with the children as they got older. They didn't want me going out in the evenings anymore. So in order to do that, I had to find people who really could, who were the kinds of people that would be the right clients for me, and I would be the right advisor for them.
Sort of fit with your culture. It takes a bit of confidence to, I think when you first start off in business, you almost like take any opportunity or take any client because you're so worried about not having the work. Would you say it takes a bit of confidence to know who's the right fit
I
rather
think,
than just taking anyone?
yeah, I think you get a feel for that, and I think generally, and I was talking at a group of ladies last week. I was telling them I met somebody just before lockdown who was very wealthy, but I knew straight away didn't value what I do, what people like I do. And it was a mistake, really. And I knew straight away, that gut instinct that you have, that this isn't a person who's going to value and appreciate me as a trusted advisor. I think you have to be, really mindful of that.
Really trust your gut.
Really, really trust your gut, because inevitably, I will say it to my team sometimes when we've had a difficult client, I should never have taken that person on. I knew at the very beginning that they didn't value and appreciate the relationship.
It's such an important piece of advice, that, I think, because, there are potentially endless clients out there, but you have got to have that kind of connection, that right fit, haven't you?
Absolutely.
So moving on to your business getting bigger, you're getting ready to sell. How did you enjoy that growth process when your business was getting bigger? Did you enjoy it, or was it stressful? How was it?
I mean, it was stressful because I was taking on more staff, and all of the issues I ever had in my business were never around finding clients. It was always around managing staff and staff relationships, and obviously having someone else do that because I was out. I spent a lot of time in London in the last few years of running the business, so I wasn't there very often. And it's very labour intensive to get somebody trained to do the stuff that we need them to do. So yes, it was very challenging, and you're looking at your costs. Your costs are getting bigger. Do you really need all those staff? But I wanted to deliver exceptional service to my clients, and in order to do that, I had to have the right staff, to do that, really.
And how did the sale come about, Diane, and why did you decide to sell?
So in St James's Place, there are different levels of people in terms of how they're perceived in the business. And the ultimate goal is to be a principal partner. And I always wanted to be a principal partner. And it seemed to me very difficult to ever be a principal partner. There were very few women. I think there's only about 60 people out of 4,500. And it was always my dream to be a principal partner. And I had a lovely girl who worked for me, and she said, if it's your dream, you need to visualize it. You need to tell me what it's going to look like when you get there. And I had a vision that I would be in Spencer House, which was our token head office in London, and that Mike Wilson, who formed St James's Place, would be standing by the fire and he'd present me with a bottle of champagne. And I kept that vision in my mind, and I got really, really focused, and it was getting harder and harder to achieve that. And on this particular year, I thought, if I don't do it this year, I probably will never do it. And it was the year that I was coming up to be 60. And I got really, really clear on my thinking, and I did it. I got there.
Amazing.
And Mike Wilson sadly was very ill when I achieved it. But he rang me and he said, come to London to my flat and I'll present you with the bottle of champagne that I would have presented. And I've got a lovely photograph of Mike and I. And then I think what happened is I thought, you know what, I've achieved everything I wanted to achieve. I'm still, that the work-life balance, the staff, I just feel it's
Were you a
time.
lot wealthier then once you'd sold your business?
Yes.
Yeah. So did that make you want to slow down?
Well, I didn't slow down because I sold the business in 2018. So I carried on working within the business. I've kept on looking after the same clients. To that regard, nothing has really changed. So I've kept on working.
And that's quite nice, because I know some entrepreneurs that exit are then a bit lost. But you didn't have to go through that because you carried on working in the business. You carried on doing what you loved.
Yes.
You had the best of both worlds.
But it was
really
different. I mean, obviously it's very different when although I'm still effectively running my own business, I'm working through another business. So having to come to terms with the fact that things are run differently, that you're
no longer the boss.
That you're no longer the boss.
How was that? I mean, did that feel... how did you transition from being the boss lady to having to be a bit less forthcoming?
Yeah, I mean, it was hard. It was hard to start with. It was because
Did you have to bite your tongue?
Yes, I did. I did. But I also used to remind myself that, the reason I'm in this position is because I was very fortunate enough to sell the business. I never regretted that decision. There were some people in my life, my daughter, her husband, a very close friend of mine, who were very supportive and encouraging of the decision to do it. And it was absolutely the right decision. So you have to accept that the consequence of that is a little bit of having to bite your tongue and accept that someone else is doing things differently.
Your family must have been very proud of you.
They were very proud of me.
What did your mum say?
My mum said to me, "Are you going to be okay financially, Diane?" That was my mum's comment, because my parents have got no idea about the success of the business, really. But so that my mum was worried that I'd be poor and, on the streets, basically.
Well, I'm glad you could reassure her in that respect.
Absolutely.
But, your passion is really helping women with their financial literacy.
Yes.
What do you think the biggest mistakes or the biggest challenges are for women in that respect?
I think women generally are not engaged in their financial journey. They don't really understand their particular circumstances, and it's very different depending on whether you're married or whether you're cohabiting. Men still generally call the shots when it comes to the finances. So women are therefore quite vulnerable. And I noticed that very, very early on in my career. In fact, the first year of my career, I was introduced by some lawyers actually here in Cheshire to a lady. And I went to see her, and her story really stuck in my mind because she'd lived with somebody for a very long time. She'd changed her name. He went out into the garden mowing the lawn and he'd passed away. And his pension died with him. She was evicted from the home they lived in after a week by his children. And she kept saying to me, he wouldn't have wanted this to happen. She thought because they were living together that she was going to be okay. And that story really is one of the reasons why I wanted to, do more to help women, because I didn't want other women to say, if I'd known that, I could have taken some action, and I didn't.
It's a lack of knowledge. And do you think even in this day and age, do you think now it's the same? Do you think there is still a lack of knowledge on women's part?
100%.
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
What's your advice to young women starting out in life to make sure that they've got a financially secure future?
So I think the first thing is to understand your circumstances. If you're employed, which lots of people are, do you actually know what's going to happen if you become ill? Do you know, have you joined your company pension scheme? Are you going to be okay if something happens to you? Is everything sorted? What are you actually spending? A lot of people have got no idea about how much they're spending. And, I've got a friend who I've been doing some work with, and she's realised that she's spending over £180 a month on coffee and cake.
Wow.
Just by going out and meeting friends. And she said, that's such a lot of money. So understand your numbers.
Track your spending.
Track your spending. Really manage, try and be really mindful of your debt. The idea that you spend and you put things on credit cards that you never pay off is just crazy, really. So just be more knowledgeable. And if you can make a few small tweaks, you can make a difference.
Yeah. What sort of tweaks would you advise?
Well, I think things like wasting money on, we live in a world now where we do buy lots of coffee, don't we? We buy lots of takeaways. We have Deliveroo. People, you can easily save money just by being more mindful about spend.
Yes.
Definitely. And all of those. So the thing about good financial planning is that little things done earlier make a big difference. Rather than wait until you feel a bit more secure, and then suddenly, your children have grown up and you're in your 50s, and it's quite hard. It's not impossible, but it's much harder to do more when you're older. It's easier to do small things when you're younger.
What about sort of when women have their families and they've got children to look after? Do you think that's a vulnerable time for women financially?
Women are very vulnerable by virtue of the fact that lots of them work part-time, they reduce their hours, they also maybe stop contributing to pensions. We've got the pension gap now as well. So women do leave themselves more vulnerable.
How can they balance that?
It is really difficult. But I think the first thing is to understand your situation. And actually, we can often give women comfort by getting them to find out what their state pension is going to be worth. Looking at because I was talking to someone last week, they said, we've got various pensions, but we don't know where to find them. So doing some research and making sure that whoever you've got pensions with when you were employed actually knows where you live, or if you've got married, knows your married name. And just trying to really look under the bonnet and see what, if anything, you can be doing. And because so many more women now are running their own businesses, they have become more vulnerable.
Absolutely. And you talk about women running their own businesses. I think there's a statistic, which I was very surprised to hear, something like only 2% of women, female founders, get venture capitalist funding. That's a shocking statistic. Why do you think that is?
I think there is still massive issues in relation to that. There are lots of organisations now, I obviously live in Yorkshire, where we are trying to get funding for women, because women make great, business owners. They really do. But there hasn't in the past historically been the support that we need for women to get those businesses off the ground.
Do you think times are changing, Diane? Do you think things are improving? Have you seen any improvement?
I've definitely seen lots more women running their own businesses, starting up their own businesses. I haven't seen as much support as I would like, because you are putting yourself in a vulnerable position if you go from running, being an employed person to setting yourself up in business. And often what happens is, the sort of phrase that I get from women is, well, I'll think about all those things you're talking about later. And what we try and encourage them to do is to put what I call the foundations in place right from the start. We all, 1 in 2 of us will get a critical illness. So if we are running our own businesses and we don't have things in place, then we can be really, really vulnerable. But obviously those things come at a cost, and it's how you can help people understand the importance of it, which is one of the reasons why I wrote the book.
Yes, your book, She Can Prosper, which is actually a #1 bestseller, available on Amazon. Really great advice in there. And you actually won an amazing award, a Stevie Award.
I did.
Tell us about that. What is a Stevie Award?
I know. So Stevie Awards are global awards for women So I was asked to go to New York. There were women from all around the world. It was an incredible evening. I think there were about 450 women in the room, and there were different categories. And I won an award for a lifetime achievement in financial services.
Amazing. Were you really shocked about that? Or did you have an inkling you might win?
We knew at the point of booking that I was going to win an award. I think because they know people are travelling so far. I mean, it is an incredible evening.
Amazing. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I mean, has that made a difference to your client base, winning that award? Has it brought in more business? Has
It
raised your
certainly raised
profile?
my profile, and made people get in touch. So that was really, why we've done some of the things we've done, because ultimately my kind of next goal is to do more work in that area, is to work with women, helping women, coaching women, helping women understand the importance of having clear business goals, understanding any kind of limiting beliefs they have around money, not being worthy enough. I'm not good with money. I'll never be able to run a successful business. So trying to dispel those beliefs so that women can be really confident around growing their own businesses. And
Because She Can Prosper is not just the book now, is it? It's a whole
it's a movement.
organisation.
Yeah.
You have events,
Yeah.
online presence. But tell us a bit more about the book, though. What's actually in the book that will benefit women?
So the book takes readers on a journey through different ages and helps them understand the things that they need to be doing, whether they're in their 20s and they've got student debt, getting a good credit rating, which people often don't realise they need to do, clearing debt where possible, and then takes them through the things that they need to do in terms of saving, budgeting, investing. To if they're in business, there's a chapter written by an accountant, and then all the things that they really need to consider. So having a will, making sure that they understand what would happen if their marriage ended. And I was really blessed because women have shared their stories in the book, and they're very personal stories, and most of them are actually clients of mine. And I think there's a small number that are anonymous, but the stories are true. And every woman that shared her story in that book said if one woman does something as a consequence of reading my story, then I feel that, it will have been worth sharing. And I've always found that helping people get their mind around what they need to do is so much easier if you share a story with them, if you can tell them about somebody who's been in their situation. And obviously, over 31 years, I've got lots of those stories to share. And it does propel people into taking action.
Do you think financial literacy should be taught in schools?
100%. St James's Place have an educational programme for schools. So we can go into schools. Children do need to understand about budgeting. They need to understand about how money works. And it is something, I'm actually working with an academy trust over in Yorkshire. And I've got a meeting with them in a couple of weeks because they're really keen to roll out financial literacy within their academies because they believe it is so important, and I do too.
And do you think that you said you were one of the very few women working in the corporate world in finance? Do you think there's more women in that arena these days?
There's certainly more women. At St James's Place, we're up to 18%, but it's still not enough. And I think women make great financial advisors. We listen, we're very empathetic. We're dealing with people's often terrible things happening in people's lives, bereavement, redundancy, illness. I think we make great financial advisors. So there is a massive push to get more women into my role.
Is there a particular area that you feel women need to pay attention to, pensions or wills, or what's the main area that you think women neglect?
Well, I'm passionate about wills. I'm not a lawyer. So I would say for every meeting I have with a client, more than half of the people that I see don't have wills and don't really understand why they need a will.
I mean, why is it so important to have one? Actually, I've not got one.
So if you die without having a will, you can leave very complicated affairs around for people to sort out. Depending on your financial situation, you can end up not inheriting the amount of money that you thought. If you have children, and by that I mean children under the age of 18, if you haven't specified who you want to look after those children, then the courts will decide. So if you've got young children, and maybe both sets of parents would like to think they would look after your children, that isn't necessarily going to happen if you haven't laid clear instructions out.
Interesting. I didn't realise that. And also inheritance tax is another big thing. I mean, I've heard women my age say, well, my parents will leave me their house or whatever, but you can't guarantee that you will benefit from that in the future, can you? There's no
No.
guarantees.
There's no guarantees at all, because, I mean, I know I've got a parent in a care home. People are living longer, their care needs are going up. So I think when people say to me, oh, well, I'm not going to worry about saving for the future because my parents are well off, I try and dispel that thought and get them to think about being able to stand on their own 2 feet.
There's a kind of people can look flashy. People want to look wealthy. Do you think that actually the wealthiest people don't necessarily look wealthy?
Well, I would certainly agree with that. I always remember when my kids were at school, the head teacher said to me, the people that turn up in the flashiest cars are the ones that don't pay the school fees on time, which used to make me smile. I have clients who I would say are new money, and I have clients who are old money. And my old money clients drive battered old cars. They have patches on their sleeves of their jumpers. They're not bothered about showing how much money they have. Whereas I think when people set up in business, maybe it's their own success rather than inherited wealth, they do like to show that they've made it. And that means often, cars and houses. But often below the surface, there's not a lot going on. So it might, the car might be rented, leased. They might have a very large mortgage on their house.
So wealth whispers.
Yes.
Wealth whispers rather than shouts.
Absolutely.
Would you be able to spot in a lineup somebody who was genuinely wealthy?
Yeah.
What would you look for?
Well, some of those things. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't some very wealthy people who, are very well presented and everything else, because obviously there are. But if you meet some of the people that I've met, they are very understated. They're very comfortable with that.
There's a lot of focus on people who are trying to become wealthy. But what about people who are already wealthy? I've read that a lot of millionaires are leaving the country at the moment. How do people who've got wealth keep it and make sure it's protected for their family going forward and future generations?
Yeah, so I personally work with lots of really good law firms. And so getting good advice is so important. One of the things I was saying last week at this talk I did, the number of people who get advised by their mates or something,
Yeah.
They believe everything they read in the newspapers, or the guy they play golf with, or whatever it is, the man they drink with in the pub. The difference between having a good outcome and a bad outcome can be the quality of the advice that you get. And it's certainly worth getting that advice and paying for it.
So be careful who you listen to.
So be careful who you listen to, definitely.
Diane, it's really been interesting hearing your story and some of your advice. But I'd like to know, what are your hopes for the future? What are your plans going forward now?
So I'm retiring from advising at the end of the tax year. I want to do more work. I'm just finishing my qualifications to be a coach. So I want to do more work coaching women, particularly around finance, being more educated, running their businesses effectively. I'd really like to do some more talking. I love talking. I love sharing my story. Podcasts. I've been doing a lot of podcasting. I'm also keen to pick up some more charity work. I haven't decided who.
So you haven't got any plans to slow down? And
No.
You've got grandchildren as
grandchildren, yeah. So no plans to slow down, but just plans to go off on a different trajectory.
And where can people find you?
So they can find me on www.shecanprosper.com. They can find me on social media, on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. We have a community of people through She Can Prosper. We do blogs that are lovely posts every week that are informative.
Can you just leave us with one key piece of advice? So if somebody wants to improve their financial position, what is the one main thing they need to think about?
I think they need to get advice from a good financial advisor, because I do believe that we can really make a difference and help people. It may not be that there's much we can do in the short term, but working with someone who really knows their stuff and who's on your side can make such a difference.
Even younger people?
Even younger people.
Diane, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been really, really interesting, and best of luck with She Can Prosper.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's been delightful.
Have you worked hard to achieve success in your field? Do you think you'd be a great guest on Success Means Business? Could you inspire others and help to teach them how to make the very best of their life, their goals, their profession? If so, get in touch. We are looking for guests on Success Means Business all the time, and we would love to talk to you. Success Means Business is brought to you by Applehead Media.